Good day, brothers and sisters. This is Anthony Moore for Your Money More, and this is part one in a series of videos I will be releasing entitled Cracking the System. And in this part one, we're going to get into the introduction to cracking the financial system. And so when we talk about cracking the financial system, we are heavily talking about our banking system here in the United States, which dictates, whether we realize it or not, our entire way of life. It, along with other dynamics within this financial system. So we're going to talk about things such as different types of debt like loans, credit, bonds, the United States Treasury, the Federal Reserve. We're going to even get into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. We're also going to talk about reparations for black people who have descended from U.S. chattel slaves and how doing that the right way, paying a debt that is owed, is ultimately and will ultimately be what's best for this United States as a whole. And so, in terms of cracking this system, by first of all cracking our financial system and the banking system, which is the primary mechanism through which we conduct transactions here in the United States of America, we're going to crack this system in order to break down how dysfunctional it actually is. We're going to crack this financial system and this banking system to break down just how stupidly, quite frankly, it is being operated in if the goal is to have widespread shared prosperity with a functional democracy, as opposed to what we have in practice, which is an oligarchy, whereby more and more wealth is being consolidated in the hands of fewer and fewer people, and more people, more and more everyday people are suffering and starving and struggling to get by. In other words, we're talking about having a functional banking system whereby you make an honest day's wage for an honest day's work. We are talking about a functional banking system whereby you can work one full-time job and it's more than enough to take care of you and your family, where you don't have to work 2 and 3 jobs and struggle to get by in what's still, for the time being, the world's wealthiest country, this here United States of America. For us to be in what not just is the what not only is the wealthiest country in the world, but what for the time being is still the financial center of the world. What for the time being still has the world's greatest military. For us to be in such a society, and for people to be able to work 2 or 3 jobs and struggle to get by, for us to have the scourge of homelessness that we have all throughout this nation, is a systemic failure. And it's a systemic failure that's very intentional, very deliberate, but also very unnecessary. And we're going to break down how and why, because the reason why the banking system and the overall financial system functions in these ways that are really counterintuitive and counterproductive in terms of what's best for our overall society is because most of us don't understand what's really going on. And it's not because it's as complicated as they make it out to be. Now, a lot of this stuff is complicated and complex, but a lot of the complication and complexity is due to financial instruments and mechanisms and operations that are unnecessary, that are just means to drain and extract wealth, that are part of the problem as opposed to being part of the solution. And so in this Cracking the System series, we're going to get into just how dysfunctional and counterproductive our banking system is and our overall financial system is, in ways that strip away the complexity. Because even if you take away the complex dynamics, you can still understand what's really going wrong with the way things are going, in ways where the solutions and things that need to be done different are rather obvious. And we're going to get into all those things and break them down. And another thing that we're going to talk about in terms of this cracking the system, especially cracking the financial system and the banking system, is what's called the repo market. And when I say repo market, no, I'm talking about the repurchase market. I'm not talking about the car repo market, the car repossession market. Because I know some people hear repo and they say to themselves, man, that reminds me, I need to go outside and have my car because I'm past due on a car note. Man, I at least need to drive it to the dark side of the street. Okay, maybe to make it hard for them to see it. No, the repurchase market is a multi-trillion-dollar a day market. It's a market which basically is the plumbing of our overall financial system here in the United States to a large extent throughout the world. As I said before, the United States still is the financial center of the world for the time being, and the repo market consists of reportedly two trillion, not billion, but $2 trillion to $4 trillion a day in transactions, and it largely entails loans that are collateralized. In other words, cash that is loaned in exchange for collateral, largely that consists of things such as U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. And even though most of us haven't never heard of it because it's a behind-the-scenes market, it's becoming increasingly critical. It's very critical too, and it's constantly becoming increasingly critical to our overall financial system, to our overall banking system. And that in itself is problematic. And we're going to get into how and we're going to get into why. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier is that we're going to talk about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And Bitcoin is the largest cryptocurrency in terms of market capitalization. It's also the first one. And it's the grandfather of them all, we can say. But I'm not going to tell you whether or not you should invest in Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency. And I'm definitely not going to get into specific cryptocurrencies that you should or shouldn't invest in. But we're going to talk about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency overall because the introduction of Bitcoin, which was in response to the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis in the United States, which led to the global financial crisis, which almost shut down banking worldwide. Bitcoin was brought out to combat the very problematic dynamics within our financial system, the dynamics that led to the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, which led to the corresponding global financial crisis. And one of those key dynamics is the very nature of the U.S. dollar, which is a fiat currency. The U.S. dollar is the world's global reserve currency. Most transactions throughout the world, most financial transactions are conducted in the US dollar. It by and far is the world's most widely trusted and widely accepted currency, which gives the United States a lot of power. Power that many countries around the world feel that the United States has abused, and some of the same dynamics that has contributed to this abuse are ultimately some of the dynamics that are decimating us in the United States by the way that this financial system is functioning. And so Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, if nothing else, have been a great gateway, especially for younger people, to understand this country's monetary policy and financial system and the problematic nature of it. And so, if nothing else, cryptocurrency is a great thing to get into in order to crack this system by the very nature of why Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general were brought about in the first place. Because one of the things I mentioned is that the United States is a fiat currency, which means it's not backed up by any tangible assets such as gold or anything other than the faith that people have in it. And when that faith wanes, the power of a fiat currency wanes. And the faith in the dollar is waning. Now, I'm not saying it's going to no longer be the world's global reserve currency overnight, but it's facing some serious challenges. And one of those challenges is coming from what are called the BRICS countries, which are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and some of which have, and they launch, at least Vladimir Putin announced that they are launching a global reserve currency to challenge the United States' preeminence as the world's sole global reserve currency, to provide a counter and an alternative to the US dollar as the global reserve currency. And the actions that the United States has taken with sanctions in Ukraine, and sanctions with Russia in response to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and other sanctions that it's been doing over the years, is actually strengthening their position, is giving more countries incentive to support and join this alternative reserve currency. Because some of the other countries that have been reported to be considering joining this block of countries, the BRICS countries, some of the other countries that have been reported to be strongly considering joining them are Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, that supposed ally of the United States. And so the reason, but going back to one of the earlier points I made, which is the importance and the necessity of us, especially the American people, cracking this financial system, this banking system, is that if we don't get it together and we don't demand the change and reform and maybe even reconstitution that is absolutely necessary, this world will be headed. I am concerned that this world will be headed towards some apocalyptic Terminator, Mad Max type society. And even though some people might find that hard to believe, it's not as hard to come about as you might think so. Especially since one of the key things that we have to be concerned about is energy, because an effective financial system takes into account what has to be done to manage, distribute, produce, find, conserve, and harvest energy, which is a finite resource. And our financial system isn't geared toward those things, to the detriment of us not having sufficient energy, bringing about what could be a global energy crisis, which could bring about that apocalyptic scenario that I just talked about. And even if you don't think that could come about, one thing is for certain: if we don't demand the change that is necessary, we will continue to get more than what we will continue to get more of what we have continuously been getting, which is people who got way more than they ever need continuing to get more that they don't need at the expense of the masses getting enough of what they do need, which is unsustainable and, quite frankly, unjust. And for my younger folks, regardless of what race you are, you especially have to demand this change, because you will have to bear the brunt of the things that are being done today. I mean, think about it. A lot of the people who are profiting from and perpetuating this dysfunctional financial system, they will be long dead and gone 10, 20 years from now, and you will be bearing the brunt of what they have done. How is that fair? How is that logical? If you want the society that you want to have, a fair one, a productive one, ideally one of peace, one of shared prosperity, and here in the United States, a true functional democracy, it's on you to work toward bringing it about, because they're not going to do it on their own. They're not going to do it without pressure, because they've already shown us that they'll lead this world to oblivion if they aren't pressured to do the right thing. Now, one of the things I mentioned is reparations for Black people who have descended from U.S. chattel slaves. In other words, who have descended from the freedmen who were the freed slaves after the Civil War. Now, reparations for slavery and everything that's been done to us since then, unlike any other group in this country, are due, are overdue, and are necessary, but they also are what's best for this overall United States of America, not just us. So reparations that we are due and that we are owed, that specifically and explicitly we need to receive, us getting the specificity that we need will be what's best for this United States of America as a whole. And we're gonna break down how and why in this series. And to that point, it's key for us as Black people, or at least enough of us, to understand this financial system and the banking system, because in order for reparations to be done the right way, to truly close the racial wealth gap, we got to understand this financial system and this banking system, because it's going to be done in the context of the financial dynamics that exist and process the banking mechanisms that control the things we do throughout this country today. And both in terms of understanding the problematic dynamics of these systems that need to be changed, but also doing it the right way in terms of finance the right way, which would be what's best for this country as a whole. Because as I mentioned earlier, effective finance as opposed to this exploitive finance that we have today, which pervades and perpetuates our way of life. Effective, I guess you could say more righteous finance is ultimately about the effective distribution, cultivation, conservation of goods and services. And so as hard as it may be for many people to believe, it actually is to your best, even if you're not one of us, it's to your best interest in the best interest of this country to do right by us as far as reparations is concerned. And you will be able to see it if you can get beyond this systematically and institutionally ingrained white supremacist, short-term fixated, narrow-minded, solely self-concerned, anti-black, non-history knowing, racist against anything by default if it's specifically and explicitly for black people who have descended from U.S. chattel slavery mindset that you are programmed to see things from in America, whether you've been here for 2 seconds or multiple generations. And we are here to help you do that. And this series is going to help you do that. Because, speaking of which, speaking of our banking system as well as reparations, or at least retribution for black people who have descended from freedmen, Citigroup, one of the four major banks in the United States, and this series is going to be about breaking down the banking system and the problematic nature of it. And Citigroup is one of the, which is the parent company of Citibank, is one of the financial institutions that are at the heart of this banking system and overall financial system. Citigroup is one of the four banks deemed too big to fail. That's problematic within itself that we have banks that are literally deemed too big to fail, especially when that was the very dynamic that it was made clear was largely responsible for the bailouts. At least that's what they told us, for the bailouts that happened relative to the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis and global financial crisis. So seeing the problematic nature of that back then, instead of doing something about it, in many cases our system doubled down on these too big to on what were already considered too big to fail banks and made them even bigger. Talk about being backwards. That's the kind of stuff we're gonna get into as far as just dysfunction. But Citigroup did a study and they released a paper on that study in 2020. And the name of the study was called Closing the Racial Inequality Gaps. And a key premise of that study was not addressing racial gaps between blacks and whites has cost the U.S. economy up to $16 trillion over the past 20 years. Now, that's just over the past, I think, $16 trillion over the past 20 years. So that doesn't even include the preceding over 400 years of subjugation, degradation, devastation, aggravation, annihilation, and even cultural appropriation that's been foisted upon us like no other group since our ancestors were brought over here over 400 years ago, enslaved on slave ships, in chains. That's just the past 20 years. And one of the declarations that is made in the study is that Citigroup estimates the economy will see a $5 trillion boost over the next 5 years if the U.S. were to tackle key areas of discrimination against African Americans. And make no mistake about it, they talking about black people who have descended from U.S. chattel slaves, and the specificity which we are owed and which we are due, but which you are programmed to fight against by default. And by the way, when I talk about this apocalyptic future that we can live in if we don't get it together, y'all ones with those white collar jobs who often ignore the plight of the masses because, hey, you're doing well, you're doing good. So you ignore the plight of the very people who facilitate and make your jobs possible, your comfort possible. Well, guess what? If we get into some apocalyptic future, you guys are going to be some of the ones that's most expendable because you have less practical skills needed for everyday survival than a lot of those people who you make more money than, such as electricians, plumbers, janitors. I mean, imagine a world without janitors. A lot of y'all couldn't survive if there was filth all over the place everywhere you went and you had to clean it up. Imagine a lot of y'all having to clean up after yourself all day, every day. A lot of y'all professional class people wouldn't be able to make it based on that alone. We talking about real talk, real things. All right. And going back to the repurchase market, the market I talked about, which is largely consists of trading collateral overnight loans made in exchange for collateral such as U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, which is a reportedly $2 trillion to $4 trillion a day market. It's as far as trading in $2 trillion to $4 trillion worth of dollars every single day. It's increasing importance to our financial system is a reflection of, a byproduct of, and both a contributor to the overall dysfunction of our financial system. And we're going to break down how and why in this series. This was part one, which is more of an introduction. But just to give it a little perspective, Hyman Minsky was an economist who came up with something called the financial instability hypothesis. And this hypothesis gained more relevance way after his death because it basically predicted the subprime mortgage crisis and the widespread global systemic failure that it would cause. And he came out with this he died way before the subprime mortgage crisis happened. He died in 1996. And the financial instability hypothesis, I believe he came out with that in the 1970s. And so at the time he was making connections that other people were not making, and what he was saying was largely disputed, was largely ignored, but yet it was undeniably proven to be true in terms of the subprime mortgage crisis and the dynamics that led to it happening. And basically what the financial instability hypothesis is that capitalist systems such as ours, by nature of their very inherent functioning and the inherent functioning of their financial systems and banking systems and the various incentives that are brought about through the fundamental constructs, are inherently prone to failure, to systematic failure, to catastrophic failure if certain things aren't done to counter that happening, such as the Federal Reserve being the lender of last resort, which is what happened, which is what had to be done to stop the global financial crisis from destroying the overall banking system in the world. And the Federal Reserve is still underpinning our overall financial system. And the way that's being done is very problematic. And we're gonna get into that in this system. Because it's my assessment that the very same dynamics that Hyman Minsky talked about that led to the subprime mortgage crisis, that led to the global financial crisis circa 2008, well, those same dynamics are underpinning the repo market, this $2 trillion to $4 trillion a day market. They are underpinning the very functioning of the repo market, which is increasingly becoming more important to our overall functioning in the society in terms of our financial system and the banking system. So this is just part one, which, like I said, is more of an introduction. I'm Anthony Moore for Your Money More. Please like, subscribe, click that notification bell. Please share, and please do these things. It costs you nothing. We out here striving to change this system. We out here striving to change the world. And even if you don't believe that this system can change for the better, even if you don't believe that this world can change for the better, at least we should strive to do so, because guess what? Some chance is better than no chance. At least by doing something, we got a chance for something to be done, for something to come about, because if we do nothing, we have zero chance. And any chance is better than no chance. And if you think that this system needs to change, if you think that this world needs to change, if you want to see a better life, if you want to see a sustainable and better life for your future generations, for the future generations of others, well then, the least you can do is support people who are striving to bring these things about, especially since it costs you nothing. People complain about how bad things are, but they won't do the least thing to help make them better, even when it's simple things such as liking and sharing and commenting and things of that nature when it comes to a video. We got to stop this hating. So I'm Anthony Moore for Your Money More. Peace.